Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the AmatoreGolf.com podcast. My name is McKenzie, and I am joined by the founder of AmatoreGolf.com, Pete Wlodkowski, and we're here today to talk to you about the Northern California golf scene.
I feel like I'm from there. I didn't grow up there. I grew up on the other coast, right? So I grew up in Connecticut, and I moved to San Francisco in the early 90s, and I remember looking at the schedules and going, this is overwhelming. There is a tournament almost every week that you could play in. And I'm not just talking about state amateurs. There were city championships, club invitationals, everything you could think of, and it was just overwhelming because the other part of it is there's no winter, really. It rains in the winter, but these tournaments were going all year round.
Right on. So how would you say, how long ago did you move from the East Coast to Northern California, and how has the competitive golf scene transformed since you first moved there?
Yeah, so when I moved there, it was the early 90s, and there wasn't Golf Genius. I mean, I'd say that's the biggest thing. I actually miss it because going back to growing up as a kid, playing in tournaments, the calligraphy scoreboard, I mean, that is something that is almost gone now from amateur golf. And some of the best tournaments now end up being not even the biggest ones. They're like club championship type events, or even member guest type events, men's or women's. Now, I have to say, some of the associations have stuck with tradition. They keep that scoreboard going, but the scoreboards even look different. I mean, calligraphy is a skill that, it doesn't make the tournament, the course, the field, everything, the tradition,
right,
that makes the tournament, but it has changed. So that's the biggest single change. But I would say the other change would be just the information. So we started AmatoreGolf.com, and this is kind of why I got involved with this. I started it right around the late 90s, 1999, 2000, because I could see that all the associations and all the major tournaments would have websites, but nobody was caring about all of the tournaments. And so I wanted to put all that information in one place. And it's the same pitch I've been given for 25 years. Schedules, news, rankings, and results. So we started that in Northern California. It wasn't even a national site when it started, and it launched in 2000 at the US Open at Pebble Beach. And from there, not only has the amateur game grown, it's had a couple of tough stints, like during mostly bad economic times, like the Great Recession in '08 and '09. But ever since the pandemic, there's just so many more golfers chasing the same. There's not that many more tournaments, but there's so many more golfers.
Gotcha. And from my understanding, what I've learned is that the Northern California, the NCGA, has a big hand, or you've got a strong partnership with the Golf Association, and you work really strongly together. And I'm sure that really influences how these tournaments are run and what impact you can have with the whole scene in general.
Yes, because the NCGA, first of all, California is such a big state that it's got 10% or more of the country's population, major cities, and in golf association terms, there are only a few golf associations that can even be close to as big as half of California. So we have two golf associations in California.
Right.
The SCGA in Southern Cal and the NCGA in Northern Cal. And each of those probably have 200,000 members or more. You look at a state like Delaware, or it's not a good example, but Minnesota or something like that. You're talking in the mid 50s probably. They don't even push 100,000 members, and it's based on population and courses and things like that. So when looking at this thing, Northern California not only was a big association, but they always thought of things in advance. And one of the things that I think they were amazing at was saying, well, we're going to take all these tournaments and come up with an amazing player of the year system, where if you play in a city championship, it's going to count toward your points, toward making, and there's actually practical reasons beyond just wanting to say, hey, I'm great, I was the 8th best player in Northern California. That may be all well and good, but if you're the 8th best men or the 8th best senior, and I think now for women as well, but I know definitely it started for men, you would be able to play and represent Northern California in what they call their cup matches against the pros. They had these matches against PGA professionals, and they do that in most states. The section of the PGA will play against the amateurs. And then the same thing for the Northern California Golf Association, playing amateurs against the Southern Cal. So that was kind of a rivalry they played.
Right.
So, there was more reasons to make that cup team, to make the top 10 than just wanting to brag about it. Players, a lot of times they would play as many of these points events as they could. So how that fits in with amateurgolf.com is our very first tournament we covered was what we call one of the majors. It was the San Francisco City Championship. So back then it had 700 or 800, maybe even 900 players playing across a number of divisions from women, men, seniors, and it was a mess. It was hard to even keep track of when your starting time was for the next match. If you won your match on Saturday, you didn't even know when your tee time was for Sunday. And you'd call the golf course and you'd get a busy signal. So I put all that online basically by hand. Anybody that knows internet and computing, I took a spreadsheet and converted it into a tabular file, uploaded it into a website. And I didn't know anything about computing, but I just figured it out. There were some software tools that I used, and I found that everybody in that tournament now they were expecting it. They were like, this is great. I can go to a website and get all this info. So I basically started replicating that tournament by tournament whenever I could.
And you've taken that to how many tournaments would you say is in the database for amateurgolf.com now? What, 3, 4, several thousand?
That's right. Probably 3,000 or 4,000, and all of them fit the mold. Most tournament databases that have started either as a hobby or as, you're going to see this with AI even more. Like, if you go to AI and say, I want golf tournaments in California, it'll give you everything, pro, amateur, and it's going to give you charity tournaments. And that's fine. But for amateurgolf.com, we've always sort of stayed away from that because we have players that want to play competitive golf, and that's sort of a rare breed. People ask me, well, what would you compare the company to? And it's really like if you're a runner, you want to run in competitive 10Ks or marathons, there's a website for that. If you're a surfer and you want to see surf cams and competitions and information on the best surf equipment and your boards and everything, well, that's going to be on a website, Surfline or Surfer. And so we do that for competitive amateur golf, and we try to do it it's editorialized. So we try to tell you which the best ones are. We have calendars of the majors, of men's, of women's, of senior. So you can kind of see where these tournaments rank. And McKenzie, as a software developer, you're going to be building us some features. One of the things we've died to have is having players talk about these tournaments. And it's going to be a challenge because I don't want to rip apart the tournaments just because they had a slow play problem or something like that. But yet, if a tournament is notoriously slow every year because they put 144 players out in a shotgun start, I think it's only fair that we tell our audience about that.
Right. And where can, competitor amateur golfers have that space to have that community and conversation about these events that, 4,000 of them, so many conversations can be had about their experiences?
It's all word of mouth right now, really.
Right.
And so, if I'm going to talk about Northern California golf, one of the most, what I would say, just interesting and sort of community-based things that's happened, the senior golfers, which is typically defined as 55 and over, smaller group of people, because people give up golf over the years for families, they don't come back to it, but there's a steady group of senior golfers that compete, and they really needed help. So years ago, before amateurgolf.com, there was a guy named Jim Ono, still around. Jim's a great guy. And he developed a thing where he not only was running some tournaments, but he was running them in a way that you'd play a practice round before the state senior amateur. So he'd bring everybody together, but he said, if everybody's playing a practice round, why not put some skins on the line or low gross, that kind of thing. So it ended up evolving into this great word of mouth, this great community. Now it's run by another Jim named Jim Knoll. And Jim sends an email out, and it goes out once a week, updates on wins and who's done what. But then it's got entry forms. It's got lodging. He'll say, well, if we're all going to play in the state amateur, I've got a great hotel deal for you. So he's really putting in a volunteer effort to help all these senior golfers. And I don't know any state that has something like that. They may, but I haven't learned of that.
Built such a strong community. So kind of jumping from there, you've touched on Northern California golf. You've touched on what amateur golf is and what it means. How how has that impacted the actual tournament scene? From my understanding, we run several Northern California golf tournaments. What are the highlights there? And, what do you have bookmarked on your calendar, especially through what you run?
It's a great question because when we started, we were a resource, as we discussed, for thousands of amateur events, and we didn't necessarily want to compete with them. So I avoided weekends where there were 3 or 4 competitive amateur events. So it's particularly in the same geography, because even Northern California stretches all the way from south of Monterey all the way to the farthest north reaches of the state. You'd take a full day to drive back and forth. So, if there was a tournament way up north and I was going to run one in Monterey, I didn't feel those competed. But mainly I did that by calendar, and nobody wanted to run tournaments in the winter because long before California had a lot of droughts, it's always had droughts in history, but there were periods in the 90s, what we called the El Nino years. It rained every weekend, and to the point where courses could not even operate. And so I decided, well, I'm still going to take a chance because I know as a golfer, I still play every chance I get. I play in the rain. And so I picked courses that drained well, which meant they were mostly modern courses or they had been upgraded. And then we ran some tournaments in the winter. And so we're still running those. So in December this year, we've got one at San Juan Oaks, which is in Hollister, which is right between San Jose and Monterey. And then we've got one at Stanford Golf Club, which is the university's course. An amazing course.
Touch on that. Who gets to play at Stanford outside of this tournament? Like, that's got to be so exclusive.
It's probably not as exclusive as playing San Francisco Golf Club or Monterey Peninsula or Cypress.
Right.
However, what's the difference if you're a golfer that doesn't have any connections? It doesn't matter. You can't call Cypress. You can't call Stanford. You don't know. Stanford has, of course, they host collegiate tournament. Of course, they host the men's and women's golf teams. But traditionally, you need to know an alumnus, to get out there.
Right.
And,
wow.
And so it's effectively a private club, and even then, it's not inexpensive. They don't just have a $50 greens fee. It's more, probably in the $200 range. So we've got this tournament. It's a 3-round Wagger Points event with a cut after 36 holes. And over the years, we've done it 20 plus years. We've had Colin Morikawa win it. We've had Max Homa won it.
Those guys are all right.
They're pretty good.
They can get themselves around a golf course, I guess.
Yeah. And when Colin won the major when he won the PGA, his first major at Harding Park, I was a big fan of that because I said, well, now I can brag about having a major champion in our amateur golf membership. And
I'm sure Max Homa is, there as well in the next couple of years. I'm sure he's going to be added to that major list as well.
He's trying. I know he's had some little growing pains in his game, but I feel like he's the classic guy that's learning from his mistakes and wanting
100%.
to get Yeah.
Well, are there any other highlights? I've heard of Pebble, I've heard of Torrey. If I could go out to those courses and play them next weekend, I would if I could. What are your other favorites?
Yeah, so, I want to be fair to our other tournaments that are partners of ours because, I look at the venues and where you can play as sort of the start of this conversation where I told you about all these great amateur weekend events, city championship, invitationals. So, I think there's, for example, on the senior side, there's an event at Sonoma Golf Club. It's 2 days. That's a private club. You can't get out there. 2-day tournament. Wonderful. I think it's called the Sonoma Amateur. You can find it on amateurgolf.com. There are tournaments at Bayonet Black Horse, which we're affiliated with. We help promote those a little bit. But if you don't know Bayonet Black Horse, these are these 2 former military courses in Seaside, which is right next to Monterey. They've got sweeping views of the Monterey Bay. They're very challenging. They're in good shape. So there's a winter tournament, the McClure Cup. There's a summer tournament as well. And they run a good show out there. Pat Jones, the general manager, and his team run a very nice tournament. So those are something you could look at. And then, all season long, there are these classic annual events. Like there's one at Carica Park called the Alameda Commuters. So what Commuters means, their logo is like a steamship. It's because there was no Bay Bridge to get between the East Bay to San Francisco. So if you commuted to San Francisco to work in a bank or something like that, you took the ferry. No big deal. Kind of fun. I can see, cup of coffee, ferry, maybe you're bringing your golf clubs.
See, for me, being from Idaho, that sounds like traveling to space. Like that
Yeah,
sounds like it. Yeah, that just doesn't even that doesn't make sense to me. That's
it
so
doesn't
so
compute, but if you
cool.
lived in Seattle or somewhere like that, you'd get it. And it's routine. People take the ferry still from the North Bay to get to San Francisco. It's a kind of avoids parking. It's a method of public transportation. But once they put the Bay Bridge in, that sort of disappeared. But the name Alameda Commuters stayed, and Carica Park's been done over. Both of those municipal courses have been completely remodeled, and they're incredible. So the Commuters is this tournament where the tournament officials wear green jackets. They are all volunteers. So there's a tradition where the tournament loses money. It could never be run if it wasn't for these volunteers and
Wow.
sponsors. And that's the old days of amateur golf. Unfortunately, the new to amateur golf is that we lose tournaments. Every once in a while, a tournament at a private club, the membership decides, we're not going to do that tournament anymore. And in the old days, there was one at La Rinconada, which is in San Jose or in Los Gatos, and it was called the Blossom Festival after the California or the San Jose Blossom Festival. And I thought, wow, what a great tournament. I can play this private club. Well, like I said, that's gone. And there are some tournaments that have gone away. But there's a lot of people out there that are, keeping this competitive amateur game going. It's not just the associations. And, and I'm not always a cheerleader. Like, I will critique things if they need to be criticized. But I will say, like, the PGA of America right now seems to be the scapegoat for everybody. You're doing a really bad job, and your pros don't get enough, and your executives spend too much, and some of that may be true, but the individual head pros at these courses, they run really nice tournaments.
Right.
We
Yeah,
have,
and they give their heart and soul to, it's for the community.
They do. So Joe Riley at Black Gold Golf Club in Yorba Linda, which is a Southern California event. He runs a tournament every March. So this coming March, you're playing in that city championship. You know that it's going to have a good field, well organized, trophies, scoreboards, the whole deal. And if you play in that, that's an experience. And if you play in that and it's your first tournament, you're going to be nervous teeing off on hole number one.
Right. No kidding.
Yeah.
Well, tell me a little about, speaking of golf experiences, can you tell me more about the two man's links events that Amateur Golf puts on and what that means for the community that shows up for those events every year?
Yes, I'd be happy to. And, because there is one in Northern California. And we started it at Bandon Dunes, which, almost everybody, if they haven't been there, it's on their bucket list. And we started the two-man links at Bandon Dunes. Don't ask me why I called it the two-man links. I mean, being a woman, back then we called a lot of the tournaments two-mans or maybe I should. Anyway, that's what I called it. The name stuck, and even I'm going to say worse, but we have a father-son division. So we have encouraged fathers and daughters, mothers and sons. Quite frankly, I have not had a mother and son or mother and daughter team yet, but they're welcome. But we have definitely had father-daughter or just husband and wife or something like that. And women are welcome in all of our events. The nature of the game is in competitive golf. You're going to get 80% of your competitive golfers are going to be men, but it's growing on the women's side. So I started these tournaments with the idea that, two people is better than one. It's easier to sell a tournament entry to one, and it's easier to travel to a tournament. It's less lonely. You don't want to wake up after shooting 85 in the middle of nowhere. Even at the nicest resort in the world, you can go drown your sorrows. But with your buddy, you can go down.
Pick each other up.
Yeah, you go.
That's
and have
what it's
some
for.
fun.
You got to ham and egg it up.
That's right. And somebody's going to take over every day. Somebody's going to play bad one of the rounds and 4 rounds. But the format's the same: 2-person best ball, and then there is half the fields now have grown into a father-son division. So that's been kind of nice. And at Pebble Beach, we play the rotation of different courses there at Pebble. That one's 54 holes. Bandon in April is 72. We have Torrey Pines here coming up in December. There's still a little room for that. Torrey Pines is coming up December 17, 18, 19. That's 54 holes. And then there's one at Sand Valley, which is in Wisconsin. Amazing golf state now. And then we go to Pinehurst in November 2026. So we've taken that on the road, if you will. We've taken that series on the road, and people really enjoy the travel, the way we run a tournament. I mean, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Brandy, who works for Amateur Golf. She runs all their tournaments, and Brandy makes everybody feel special. At some point, if you come to an event, you're probably going to get handed a gift or an award by Brandy. She doesn't like to leave everybody out. So.
That sounds like my kind of tea prize. That's the best part of the experience, is making those connections and getting fun gifts to commemorate the entire event. I think that's such a huge part of golf. My dad has instilled in me very, to commemorate any event, you've got to get the ball marker, you've got to get this, because it's not just about the item, it's about every memory that's associated with that item. So it's awesome that, you guys make it such a big deal at these, they're not easy to get to. They're not, they're not $50 courses. It's an entire experience. So that's really special.
It's right. That's true. And that's why we like to list all the events. A lot of the events we list are, they compete with us in a sense, and that's fine, because there's something for everybody. And if I would leave you with anything, if you listen to this and you are interested in competitive amateur golf, don't wait to enter your first event. You haven't played it until you've gone out and either embarrassed yourself or maybe surprised yourself with what you can do, right?
Definitely.
So we've been doing it 25 years now, McKenzie, and I want to welcome you to the team, because I know that the combination of talking about tournaments, equipment, player accomplishments, and all that goes along with it is going to be really important, and one person can't do it all. So we've expanded our team considerably.
It's already been a dream. And I think my final question, being someone who's new to the golf scene, especially Northern California, is if you were to recommend to me one course to go out and play this weekend, have to go play, what would it be and why? And we'll wrap it up with that.
Yeah, and I'm going to stick with what would be accessible. And
yes.
I'm going to say, but I'm going to say budget's no option. Like if budget isn't an option and you're saving up for this,
this is a special round. Let's say my dad's coming with me. You have to play.
That's right. And we're going to stick with Northern California, and it's going to be Pebble Beach, and we're going to put an itinerary together, though that might be a little different than the classic Pebble Beach package, where you come out, you stay 3 or 4 nights in their lodge or in the Spanish Bay. Wonderful way to do it, but we're going to extend that trip, and we're going to get you to Bayonet Black Horse. We're going to play the Poor Man's Pebble Beach, which is Pacific Grove Golf Links, mini course right on the ocean. But clearly, you're going to have to play Pebble Beach to do it. You're going to need to stay there and book in advance. And until you've done it, you haven't experienced what many people say is the greatest meeting of land and sea. And I'm not going to argue with them. When you get on the 7th hole and you're looking down that hill, and then you get into the stretch that starts 8, 9, 10, it's pretty incredible.
Well, that's definitely going to be on my calendar. I know Amateur Golf puts on that event that it just sounds like the most exceptional weekend. So I'm going to be looking forward to it one day when it happens for me.
Yeah, that was not a sales pitch. Well, thank you so much for having me, McKenzie, to do this, because Northern California is our roots, but international is what we are now. We're not a huge company, but if you Google anything about amateur golf, you're going to probably wind up on our website at some point.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Pete. It was a great conversation, and we'll talk to you next time.
Okay, McKenzie.